Imagine standing in the door of an airplane, and it's roaring at like 150 miles an hour.
Oh, man.
Right. You are strapped into 150 pounds of gear. It is pitch black outside, and green, red, and blue tracer bullets are just ripping through the sky all around you.
Sounds terrifying.
It really does. One guy said it sounded like a handful of rocks being violently shaken in a tin can.
Wow.
And, if you jump, you might die. But if you stay, your plane might literally explode.
Yeah, talk about a lose-lose situation.
Exactly. And this wasn't some movie script. This is the dirt-level, intensely personal reality for the men of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne, specifically on June 6, 1944.
D-Day.
D-Day, yeah. Usually when we read about World War II, we look at the sprawling kind of macro-level strategy. You have a picture of those big generals moving neat little blocks of troops across giant maps in London.
Right, the grand chess game.
Yeah, but the moment you step out of headquarters and drop into actual combat, that organized map is it's completely shredded. Welcome to today's Deep Dive. We are unpacking how a group of Depression-era civilian kids from wildly different backgrounds transformed into one of the most effective light infantry companies in the world.
And what's fascinating here is the sociological miracle of that transformation.
It really is a miracle.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a unit that didn't just survive the unprecedented horrors of combat. Before they even saw a single German soldier, they had to survive a brutal, completely unforgiving training regimen and, ironically, a pretty tyrannical commanding officer.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand how these men fought in Europe, you really have to understand why they were there in the first place.
Right.
And how they were systematically broken down and rebuilt in Camp Tocco, Georgia, back in the summer of 1942.
Tocco was no joke.
No, it wasn't. So why volunteer to be a paratrooper? I mean, sure, there was a $50 monthly jump bonus for enlisted men.
Which was huge back then. It essentially doubled their military pay.
Right, double pay is great. But it couldn't have just been the money. I kind of think of it like choosing the most dangerous extreme sport imaginable. You don't just do it for the adrenaline. You do it because you want to guarantee that the guy standing next to you is as crazy and dedicated as you are.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, because they knew they were going into combat, and they absolutely did not want to rely on poorly motivated draftees when the shooting actually started.
And that shared mindset is, well, it's the crucial baseline here. You really have to look at the socioeconomic reality of who these men were.
Right, the Great Depression.
Exactly. They were children of the Depression. They had grown up with literally holes in the soles of their shoes.
Wow.
Yeah, and many had their educations cut short just to go work in factories or on farms. Because of that severe domestic hardship, they were already deeply accustomed to suffering.
They were tough before they even got there.
Right. They were incredibly self-reliant. And beyond the paycheck, they possessed this profound desire to make their time in the Army actually mean something. They were seeking a family, like an elite in-group to identify with.
And the Army gave them that.
They did, but they made them pay for it in sweat, starting with Mount Currahee.
Oh, man, Currahee. So Currahee is this massive 1,000-foot hill that just dominates the landscape at Camp Tocco. And the word itself is Native American for "we stand alone."
Which became their regiment's battle cry?
Yeah, Currahee.
Yeah.
And they ran this mountain constantly, 3 miles up, 3 miles down, just over and over. But it wasn't just about building leg muscles, was it?
Not at all.
It seems like the physical training was actually a mask for psychological conditioning.
Absolutely. The trainers were actively trying to find the psychological breaking point of every single man. I mean, take the infamous spaghetti lunch incident.
Oh, this story's wild.
It really is. So at the end of their second week of training, the men are completely exhausted, right? The officers tell them, relax, no runs today.
A rare break.
Or so they thought. They are brought into the mess hall and fed this massive, heavy spaghetti lunch. They eat as much as they want.
Which is a trap.
A total trap. The moment they walk out the doors, their stomach's completely full. A whistle blows. The orders are changed. They are forced to run Currahee immediately.
Just a devastating mind game. Running up a mountain full of heavy pasta.
And a physical mind game, too. Ambulances actually followed the men up the mountain, and they were there specifically to pick up the soldiers who were literally vomiting spaghetti all over the trail.
That's brutal.
And here is the really crazy mechanism behind the madness. Anyone who dropped out and accepted a ride in that ambulance, they were shipped out of the paratroopers that very day. Done. Gone.
Wait, really? Just for getting sick?
Yep. The dropout statistics paint a pretty brutal picture. Out of 5,300 enlisted volunteers who arrived at Toko, only 1,800 ultimately graduated.
That's a massive washout rate.
And for officers, it took 500 volunteers to yield just 148 graduates.
So they are just systematically weeding out anyone who has a breaking point.
Exactly.
Which leads to this insane test of endurance before they even leave the country. I read that their regimental commander, Colonel Sink, saw this newspaper article, and it was about a Japanese Army battalion setting a world record by marching 100 miles in 72 hours.
Oh, yeah. The Atlanta March.
Right. Sink apparently decides his 2nd Battalion is going to beat it, just to prove a point.
And he does it. They initiate a 118-mile march from Camp Toko to Atlanta.
118 miles.
Yeah, and they complete it in 75 hours, with only 33.5 actual hours of marching time.
That is just unbelievable.
The physical toll was staggering. They marched over these unpaved, muddy roads in the freezing rain. At night, they slept on bare, windswept hills where the temperature dropped into the low 20s.
With no tents or anything.
Nothing. Their boots and socks froze completely solid overnight. In the mornings, the men had to remove the shoestrings entirely, just to force their swollen, bleeding feet back into the leather.
How does a human body even sustain that?
And honestly, it requires shutting down the brain's natural self-preservation instincts. There is this really vivid detail in the source material about a private named Donald Malarkey.
What happened to him?
By the 3rd day, his body is so broken down that he is literally crawling on his hands and knees just to get to the chow line.
Oh my God.
Right. His platoon leader sees this and orders him to ride in the ambulance. But Malarkey flatly refuses.
He wouldn't get in.
No. And as the battalion finally approaches the outskirts of Atlanta, a military band starts playing. Hearing that music, Malarkey somehow straightens up, completely ignores the agonizing pain in his feet, and finishes the march as if he is passing in review.
That is the definition of mind over matter.
Truly. Out of 586 men in the battalion, only 12 failed to complete that march.
Wow. So the physical crucible really turns them into iron. But, iron is brittle unless it's forged properly.
Right.
Which brings us to the psychological crucible. To bond a group of young men, you usually need a common enemy. And normally, that's the opposing army, right? The Germans. But Easy Company found their common enemy in their own camp.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of unit cohesion, we are really looking at the mechanics of trauma bonding here.
Trauma bonding, okay.
Yeah, human beings form the tightest in-groups when they are collectively threatened by a hostile out-group, and the unintentional architect of this brotherhood was their own commanding officer.
Captain Herbert Sobel.
Exactly, Captain Sobel.
The sources describe Sobel in incredibly unglamorous terms. He's ungainly, he's unathletic, and just petty. One soldier actually said he ran like a duck in distress.
It's duck in distress. Yeah, that about sums it up.
He is the textbook definition of a chicken shit leader. Someone who generates maximum anxiety over matters of absolute minimum significance.
Absolutely.
The irony is just wild. These guys survived freezing weather and 118-mile marches, but their most desperate war in training was against their own boss.
Because Sobel ruled entirely by fear and, frankly, arbitrary punishment. It wasn't about enforcing standards. It was about establishing dominance.
Like what? What would he do?
Well, during Saturday inspections, he would walk down the line, pick a man he simply didn't like, and gig him.
Gig him, meaning like a demerit.
Right, military slang for a formal demerit.
Yeah.
But he would gig a man for, 30 years, or a microscopic speck of dust on a rifle. And he did it specifically to deny that soldier a hard-earned weekend pass.
So they couldn't even go home or go to town. And if they pushed back,
The punishments were absurd. Say a soldier was late returning from a pass after a full week of exhausting training. Sobel would order the man to dig a trench 6 feet long, 6 feet wide, and 6 feet deep.
a 6-foot cube, that would take hours.
Hours of back-breaking labor. And when the exhausted soldier finally finished this massive pit, Sobel would walk out, look at it, and just say, "Fill it up."
Just fill it up. Pure psychological harassment. But the men didn't just take it. The subversive pranks they pulled on him are legendary. They actively used his incompetence against him.
Oh, they definitely did.
My favorite is this night exercise where Sobel wants to teach his men a lesson about security. So he sneaks around in the dark, stealing rifles from sleeping soldiers.
A classic Sobel move.
Right. And the next morning, he calls a massive formation to humiliate his company. only to discover that he had gotten lost in the woods, wandered into Fox Company's temporary camp, and stolen the rifles of an entirely different company.
Which is funny, but it highlights a fatal flaw for anyone commanding combat troops. So Sobel could not read a map.
That's pretty important for an officer.
It's essential. He had virtually no tactical sense, and the enlisted men and the non-commissioned officers, the NCOs, they knew this and they capitalized on it.
Like with the medics.
Yes. During a medical training exercise where Sobel was acting as a simulated casualty, the company medics actually administered real anesthesia to him.
They knocked out their own captain.
They put him to sleep and performed a fake appendectomy on him.
No way.
He woke up with an actual incision all stitched up and bandaged, and no one in the company would confess to who orchestrated it.
That is incredible. You also have Private George Lees, who is this master impressionist.
Oh, Lees was brilliant.
During a night march in England, Easy Company gets stuck behind a barbed wire fence. Lees hides in the dark and perfectly imitates the voice of Major Horton, the battalion executive officer.
Ray, his boss.
Yeah, so Lees shouts from the shadows, "Cut those fences!" And Sobel, never questioning authority, just orders the fences cut, which unleashes a local English farmer's cows to wander all over the countryside.
And Sobel got severely reprimanded for that, right?
Oh, yeah. Severely reprimanded by his superiors. But he never figured out it was his own private tricking him.
And, the foil to all this chaos was First Lieutenant Dick Winters.
The legendary Dick Winters.
Oh, exactly. Winters led entirely by example. He was in peak physical condition, possessed brilliant tactical instincts, and genuinely cared for the men. He quietly absorbed a tremendous amount of Sobel's targeted harassment just to shield the company from it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. So Winters survives Sobel's psychological warfare. But mental toughness in a training camp in Georgia is entirely different from the physical reality of actual combat.
Very true.
By late 1943, the company is stationed in Aldbourne, England. They're preparing for the invasion of Europe. And suddenly, having an incompetent leader transitions from being a frustrating annoyance to a lethal threat.
It's life or death now.
Exactly. I mean, put yourself in the boots of the NCOs, the sergeants at Easy Company. You've seen your captain panic in the dark. You know he cannot read a map,
Right.
with mathematical certainty that he will get you and your friends killed in a firefight.
And the tension reaches a boiling point over something incredibly trivial.
As always with Sobel.
Exactly. So in October 1943, Sobel orders Lieutenant Winters to inspect the latrines at 10 a.m. But without informing Winters, Sobel arbitrarily changes the inspection time to 9:45 a.m.
A total setup.
Total setup. When Winters performs the inspection at 10:00, he discovers Sobel has already been there and written him up for failing to follow orders.
Unbelievable.
Sobel offers Winters a choice. He says, accept a petty punishment or formally request a court-martial.
And Sobel clearly expects Winters to just take the punishment and back down. Right?
He vastly underestimated him. Winters refuses the punishment and demands the court-martial.
Wow.
Yeah, he recognizes that the company simply cannot function with both of them in leadership, so he forces a crisis. And in retaliation, Sobel uses his authority to have Winters transferred out of the company to become the battalion mess officer.
He makes him a cook.
Basically, yeah. And this administrative move is the spark that ignites the NCOs.
The sergeants, specifically guys like Mike Ranney and Salty Harris, they organize a secret meeting. And I want to pause here just to emphasize the sheer gravity of what they decide to do.
It was huge.
They all write out their resignations and agree to turn in their stripes. It is important to realize this wasn't like a modern corporate walkout or complaining to an HR department. In the military, during wartime, a collective refusal to serve under a commanding officer is an act of mutiny.
And the penalty for mutiny in the face of the enemy is death by firing squad.
Death.
Yeah. They were risking their own execution just to save the company. It perfectly illustrates the absolute forged-in-fire trust these men had in each other.
They had to be totally unified.
They had to act collectively. Because if even one dissenter exposed the plot to the higher-ups before they acted, they were all doomed.
And Winters actually finds out about it, right?
He does. Winters discovers the meeting in progress, rushes into the room, and pleads with them. He says, "Don't. This is mutiny." And right as the words leave his mouth, Captain Sobel walks in.
The panic in that room must have been suffocating.
You'd think so. But Sobel somehow misses the tension completely. He just picks up a book and leaves, pretending nothing is happening.
Classic. So oblivious.
But the resignations do make their way to the regimental commander, Colonel Sink.
And Sink is predictably furious.
Yeah.
He calls the NCOs together, screams at them, and literally threatens them with the firing squad. He busts Sergeant Ranny all the way down to private.
But Sink is a smart commander.
Right. He realizes he cannot execute his entire NCO corps without destroying his own battalion. And more importantly, he realizes the sergeants are right.
The men will not follow Sobel out of an airplane.
No way. So, Sink quietly and discreetly transfers Sobel out to run a parachute jump school for doctors and chaplains.
A perfect job for him, really.
Yeah, out of the way. He reinstates Winters and brings in a highly competent officer, Lieutenant Thomas Meehan, to take command of Easy Company.
Which must have been a huge relief.
Huge. So competent leadership is finally secured. But now, the terrifying reality of what they actually about to do sets in. So what does this all mean for the individual soldier?
It's go time.
Yeah, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes right before D-Day. You're no longer fighting a petty officer in camp. You are preparing to drop into a hostile country. What does that psychological toll look like? I mean, just imagine trying to board a moving airplane while wearing your own body weight in equipment.
The physical burden was monumental. And honestly, it highlights a massive disconnect between military planners sitting at desks in London and the actual battlefield reality.
What do you mean?
Well, the planners wanted the paratroopers to carry everything they could possibly need to survive behind enemy lines. We are talking 100 to 150 pounds of equipment per man.
That is insane.
It included these impregnated chemical suits. Because the planners feared the Germans might use mustard gas like they did in World War I, the men's uniforms were heavily coated in this stiff, non-breathable chemical paste.
That sounds miserable.
It caused torrents of sweat and severely restricted their movement.
Plus, they were carrying, 3 knives, rations, compasses, radios, and those things called gammon bombs.
Right. Gammon bombs were essentially these heavy, hand-thrown plastic explosives designed to take out tanks.
Thanks.
Yeah. And adding all this gear made moving nearly impossible. So to solve this, the planners issued a brand new, totally untested piece of equipment, the British leg bag.
The notorious leg bag.
Exactly. The theory was that a paratrooper would stuff his heaviest gear, machine gun tripods, extra ammo, radios, into this large canvas bag. Then he'd attach it to his leg with a quick release mechanism and tie it to his parachute harness with a 20-foot rope.
Okay, so the idea is you jump, the chute opens, you release the bag, and it dangles 20 feet below you. It hits the ground first, the line goes slack, and you land safely without breaking your legs from the weight. Honestly, it sounds brilliant on paper.
On paper, sure, but it was a disaster waiting to happen in a chaotic drop. And the men knew it. The psychological burden really mounted during their dress rehearsals, like Operation Eagle and the jumps at Slapton Sands.
Those didn't go well.
No, these exercises went terribly wrong. Men were dropped miles off target, and there were hundreds of broken bones.
Just in practice.
Just in practice. And adding to the dread were the deeply personal stakes for some of these guys, like Sergeant Bill Garneray. He accidentally read a letter meant for another soldier and discovered his own brother had just been killed fighting in Italy.
Oh, man, that's heavy.
He vowed right then to become a wild man and a ruthless killer in Normandy.
The pre-jump atmosphere sounds intensely visceral. You've got men shaving their heads into mohawks and painting their faces.
Yeah, the Germans had been broadcasting propaganda that American paratroopers were psychopathic felons.
Yeah.
So the men decided to just lean into the terrifying image.
Might as well, right. And the tension is so thick that Lieutenant Winters actually lets a subordinate, Lieutenant Schmitz, challenge him to a wrestling match just to blow off steam.
Just right there on the tarmac.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
But Winters throws the man so hard, he accidentally cracks Schmitz's vertebrae, keeping him out of the invasion entirely. And the dark humor of the situation is that for the rest of the day, troopers are jokingly lining up, asking Winters to break their arms so they don't have to jump.
Wow. Which brings us to the jump itself. June 5th, transitioning into the early hours of June 6th, 1944. 2 years of the most rigorous, meticulously planned training in the world is about to collide with live combat.
The moment of truth.
The men load into the C-47 transport planes, and almost as soon as they cross the French coastline, the master plan disintegrates.
Yeah, they hit a dense cloud bank, and the anti-aircraft fire, the flak starts just tearing into the formations.
And remember, the C-47 pilots had very little combat experience. Surrounded by exploding shells, they completely panic.
Which you can't really blame them for, but it ruins the drop.
Exactly. The protocol for a parachute drop dictates slowing the plane down to a safe jump speed of around 100 miles per hour and maintaining a steady altitude.
Right.
Instead, to escape the flak, the pilots break formation, dive aggressively, and accelerate to speeds of 150 miles per hour or more.
Way too fast.
They are flying wildly evasive maneuvers, dropping as low as 250 to 500 feet off the ground. Completely lost, they just flip on the green jump lights.
So the men hurl themselves out the door into a devastating prop blast. And remember the physics of those untested British leg bags?
Yep, here we go.
At 150 miles an hour, the sheer force of the wind violently tears the bags right off the men's legs. Almost every single bag is lost in the dark, taking the radios, the heavy machine guns, and the extra ammunition with them.
The tragedy of the disorganized drop is immediate. Lieutenant Meehan, the competent commander who replaced Sobel, he is flying in plane number 66. As they approach the drop zone, the aircraft takes a direct hit from anti-aircraft fire. It maintains course for an agonizing moment, flips on its landing lights as if trying to sit down, and then crashes into a hedgerow, erupting in a massive fireball.
That's devastating. Easy Company has not even fired a weapon yet, and they have lost their commanding officer and their entire headquarters section.
Gone in an instant.
Because they jumped so low and so fast, the opening shock of the parachute is brutal. It just snaps them violently in their harnesses, and they hit the Normandy ground mere seconds later.
Completely scattered.
Scattered miles away from their designated drop zones, it is pitch black. A trooper named Bert Christensen lands alone near a German anti-aircraft gun. He cuts himself out of his chute and sees a silhouette crawling toward him in the dark.
Now, because they knew they would be scattered, the men were issued these cheap dime store cricket clickers for identification.
Right, the clickers.
The code was simple. 1 click to be answered by 2 clicks.
So Christensen aims his revolver at the shadow and clicks his cricket. Click, clack, silence. The shadow keeps crawling toward him. He clicks again. Still nothing. He is a fraction of a second away from pulling the trigger when the shadow suddenly whispers, "For Christ's sake, don't shoot."
Who was it?
It's his own assistant gunner, Private Robbins.
Yeah.
Robbins had actually lost the clicker part of his cricket during the violent jump.
Yeah.
He just had the hollow metal piece.
Wow, that was incredibly close. The chaos was absolute. I mean, take Private Burgess. He manages to link up with a mixed group of paratroopers. At first light, a German soldier pops up from behind a hedgerow and shoots Burgess point blank right through the face.
Oh my.
The bullet shatters his cheek and exits his neck. He is bleeding profusely, but he survives because of his training.
How so?
He remembers the medical instructors at Toko hammering the protocol into his brain. If you get hit, don't panic. Stay calm to keep your heart rate down.
Credible discipline.
Yeah. His buddies patch him up, hide him in a barn, and a sympathetic French farmer sits with him, literally holding his hand through the night before, sneaking him to safety the next day. And, this raises an important question. How do soldiers function when the entire battle plan evaporates the second they leave the airplane? They have no commander, no radios, no heavy weapons, and they are completely surrounded by the enemy.
Honestly, this is exactly where the misery of Toko and that shared hatred of Captain Sobel actually saved their lives. The men didn't freeze in the dark because their intense self-reliance and intimate knowledge of one another allowed them to adapt instantly.
They didn't need a map.
Right. They didn't need a captain with a map to tell them what to do. Every private knew the tactical job of a sergeant. Every sergeant could lead a platoon. They could recognize each other in the pitch black just by the specific silhouette of how a man walked or how his helmet sat on his head.
It really brings the whole journey full circle. I mean, Easy Company started as a group of individual kids looking for a challenge, mostly to escape the economic despair of the Depression. They were hardened by the physical torture of Mount Currahee. They were psychologically united by their shared survival of Captain Sobel. And ultimately, they were thrust into the ultimate test on D-Day, completely stripped of their leadership, their heavy equipment, and their battle plan.
And yet
they prevailed. They succeeded precisely because of the profound, unbreakable bonds they formed in the dirt and the mud of training.
it really leaves you with a profound thought to mull over, We so often look at great achievements, whether in military history, in a corporate boardroom, or just in our own lives, and we assume they are the result of perfect planning and visionary top-down leadership.
But the story of Easy Company suggests a completely different reality. What if the most vital ingredient for surviving absolute chaos isn't a flawless strategy or a perfect boss? What if the secret is the intense forged-in-fire trust you have in the peers standing right beside you in the mud?
That's a great point.
It makes you wonder, do we spend far too much time in our own lives looking up for leadership and not nearly enough time valuing the band of brothers and sisters we built in the trenches?
Man, and suddenly, that neat, macro-level map of the war doesn't seem quite so important anymore. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.